All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. And rather than have folks introduce themselves, I believe what I will do is just read you a quick list of who we have on the line. We've got Brooke Boston, Carissa Doherty, Eric Samuels, George McIntyre, Jana Burns, Kelly Kravitz, Lori Henry, Mendy Snodgrass, Molly Boyles, and Pam Merklin. So we've got 10 folks on the line. What we're going to do today is to, and I'm sorry, in the room we have folks from THN. I'm sorry.
Michael with TICH.
Michael with TICH is here. Ken Martin is in the room. Craig Fierro and Samantha Maggiani, who is working with THN as a policy intern. And so we appreciate you taking the time to join us today. We will be giving a quick summary of the surveys that we've completed to date and the assessment around really how the Texas Interagency Council is doing with regard to its statutory requirements. So what I'm going to do is to do a fairly brief PowerPoint presentation. Craig sent that PowerPoint around to you previously along with the full report. If you, for whatever reason, haven't received it, just, yeah, we'll send it again. And actually, there's a formatting error that we're going to correct anyway, so you should be getting a second version of it later this afternoon. So just in terms of the project overview, you may recall that we started this process late last year. First of all, just really taking some time to have some conversations with the active members of the TICH about the various elements of the enabling legislation for the council. You all were very patient. We spent quite a bit of time doing that. After that, in early December, we had a work session to kind of talk about some of the early feedback from those surveys, and to talk a little bit about folks' sense of what was most important for us to focus on. As we've been going along, we've been having conversations with outside experts, and that is including folks within the state at the local level and some national experts as well. And then today we are giving you the full presentation of the report as it stands at present. I know that, unfortunately, I was unable to attend the January 20th meeting, and so Ken shared an executive summary with you at that time. After this, we'll be moving forward, looking a little more closely at other states' interagency council practices, but really the next major deliverable is that by the end of March, we want to have an action plan for how we can improve on those statutory requirements that we may not be getting an A+ on just right now. Acknowledging that that statute is pretty broad, we know that we probably won't be able to work on all fronts at the same time, and so TDHCA has asked us with you to have the TICH select a couple of action areas to really focus on through the course of the spring and summer, so that we can have at least a couple areas where we show some demonstrable improvement, get into alignment with the statute, and then also kind of lay out our plans for future work. So let me mention as we go along, you folks are muted, so I apologize if you've been talking to me and I haven't answered you. We're going to ask folks just to kind of cut down on the static, etc., to hold questions until the end of the presentation, but I think with that we will have plenty of time to do that after we complete the slides. So one thing that I wanted to do before we dive in here is to give as simple a summary of what the statute contains as possible. And so for those purposes, I would say there are sections about membership and the operations of the council, sort of housekeeping, if you will. There are some very specific council duties, And then there are also some authorizations and requirements around the ability and duty of the council to make policy recommendations and do reporting. So very quickly around membership, as you know, the council is constituted as an advisory committee to TDHCA. There are appointees from many, I think we're 13 or 14 state agencies, and many of the agencies in statute at present are agencies that no longer exist. We won't be diving deep into that today because it's fairly self-evident what is and isn't in existence anymore, and that's something that I know Mike Doyle and folks are working on getting cleaned up. The statute requires that we elect a presiding officer, that we meet quarterly, and that we take action by a majority of those present. It doesn't necessarily include anything around quorum. And then it states that TDHCA will provide staff support, but also that the member agencies will contribute resources. I think we've talked about this a little bit before. The statute indicates agencies should contribute resources. It is not entirely specific about whether those resources are financial or in staff time. And so I know that's something that we'll be thinking about going forward. And then finally, there are a few bells and whistles there that allow the council to utilize outside advisors, to hold public hearings, and to accept gifts from time to time from other public or private entities. And from there, we move into what are really sort of the core council duties in statute. There are 9 overall duties. There are 8 listed here, and I'll talk about the 9th as soon as I finish. One is that we survey the resources for homelessness in the state, that we evaluate needs, current and future needs for services for the homeless, that the TICH have a resource and information center, that the TICH coordinate with the TWC in some very specific ways, that the council help to coordinate services for the homeless, that we increase the information flow among both state entities and providers, that we provide technical assistance to TDHCA, and that technical assistance in statute is directed to the Housing Finance Division. And then there's some language about developing guidelines both around methods of delivering service and ways to monitor that service. I will say that the 9th statutory duty you will see at the bottom of the slide. Essentially, the 9th duty is if the TICH cannot carry out any of these duties itself, it has a duty to ensure that state or local nonprofits carry out duties it cannot. And the reason that I put it here at the bottom, and it's kind of overarching, is that I think it really encompasses all of the requirements of the statute, and it's something that rather than a duty is really a means that the TICH has at its disposal for making sure the other requirements are met. So then I want to move to recommendations and reporting. The TICH is authorized to make policy recommendations. In statute right now, those recommendations or that authorization is to make policy recommendations to the board of TDHCA. The statute actually requires that the TDHCA board would have to respond in writing to any recommendations that were not accepted. And then there's really a second level of reporting, or two types of reporting. One is the annual report that you guys are all familiar with, that we've been doing, I think, much better over the past few years with getting in and having a meaningful document. But the statute also requires that the TDHCA set performance measures for each of the member agencies, and that those agencies then report to the TICH annually around those measures. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move along. So I'm going to move then from the summary of the statute to talk a little bit about how members felt like we were doing, particularly around sort of operations and membership. So first of all, I'll remind you, most of you actually took the survey, but for those of you that didn't, we asked folks to tell us how they thought the TICH was doing on these various requirements on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being we are always doing this, we're fully complying with the statute, and 1 being never or not at all, we're just not doing that. It was certainly permissible for people to say that they didn't know, and in those cases their responses were not averaged into to the survey result. It is a fairly small N, if you will. We had, I believe, 10 of the 13 active members responding, but still I think it gave us a pretty good indication of where folks felt like we were doing well and not so well. So first of all, I would say, hey, congratulations. There's several areas here where we think that we are appropriately fulfilling the requirement of statute. In terms of electing a chair, this TDHCA staff, everyone 201 felt like the TDHCA staff was clearly providing administrative support and advisory support to the council. And so in terms of really the way that the council is running, mostly folks felt like we were doing pretty well. There are a couple notable exceptions. One is that obviously we don't have the membership that the statute calls from. We didn't survey on that because we knew the answer, so that's not shown here. But then the bottom 2 items on the chart here are things that people felt a little concerned about. One is whether the members had authority to make decisions and commit resources on behalf of their agencies. And many folks felt like that maybe the language was not particularly realistic in terms of their ability to do that without actually going through their agency's process first. But also some thought that it wasn't really only about committing resources, but that really an acknowledgement that we have very valuable folks at the table, but that the statute might be calling for something closer to an agency head serving on the council. And then the area where folks felt like we were complying the least, if you will, was around agency contributions to the council. And again, I don't think this is a surprise to anyone. Historically, we've not had much in the way of financial contributions. Mike Doyle has been working hard to begin to line this up, and I think it's something we'll be working on going forward. So then let's talk about the actual statutory duties of the council and how folks felt like we were doing there. The 3 areas that people felt like we were doing the best at were, first of all, increasing information flow. And really the feedback that we got on this point was that just by virtue of the council meetings, the presentations that occur there, but also really the relationships that are formed via the council, there was better communication amongst the agencies and a better understanding of what the partner agencies do. The next 2 areas are survey the resources for the homeless in the state and evaluate current and future needs for services. So again, this was the same scale as the previous chart. So folks felt like we were leaning towards often or mostly complying with these areas. And I would say that the majority of folks felt like we were doing this largely through the development of the Pathways Home framework and the reporting on that, and that there had been some additional work around surveying resources or evaluating needs, but that was really the central way that the TICH to date had been meeting those requirements. So if you look then at the rest of the chart, unfortunately, the remaining six duties were all duties that people felt like we really were falling a bit short on. And I want to pause here and say that one of the things that became fairly clear through the course of the interviews is that folks felt like we were falling short, but sometimes they felt like we were falling short of statute because the statutory language wasn't entirely fitting the role of the TICH, or sort of the reality of how the agencies needed and the TICH needed to function in interaction with each other. So in the report, particularly around these duties and around some of the additional reporting requirements, what you'll find is an entire page for each of the duties that attempts to capture not only how we're doing, but what the feedback was from TICH members about what pieces of the language did or didn't make sense, how that might change in the future if there's an opportunity to do that, and then their ideas for how we were to some degree meeting that statutory requirement, or where we might have some room for improvement. So just to summarize those areas where folks felt like we maybe weren't doing quite as well, one was coordinating services for the homeless statewide, collaborating with TWC at the local level, providing an information and resource center, delegating duties to nonprofit organizations, developing those guidelines for monitoring and providing services, and then providing technical assistance to TDHCA. So let me move then to the final piece, which is around the TICH's ability to make recommendations and its requirement to do reporting. So first of all, members felt really confident that we were meeting the requirement of the annual progress report, and I know that has been an area of real focus for the TICH over the past 4 to 5 years, and that has paid off. Having said that, the TICH is, and I apologize, there's actually a piece of data missing here, but it's around 1. We are authorized to make policy recommendations to the TDHCA. Members did not feel like we were formally doing that, although they certainly felt like TDHCA was hearing the input from the TICH and that policies were influenced because of the TICH membership and their recommendations. Having said that, however, because that input has been informal, they were not entirely clear whether that input was being worked into the TDHCA's low-income housing plan. That's the second element that you'll see here on the chart. And they also indicated that we weren't getting a written justification for the TDHCA not accepting recommendations, which is not surprising given that we haven't really been making written recommendations. The two I want to draw your attention to now are the ones that are in the middle of the chart, because I think this is important. In addition to the annual reporting to the member agencies, statute requires that TDHCA set performance measures and that those agencies, member agencies, then use those standard performance measures to report back to TDHCA and the TICH. So we are falling somewhere between never, not at all, and seldom marginally on this front. And so it's something we want to think about in terms of how we would address that going forward, acknowledging that we've had many discussions about the challenges around data with our partner agencies that may or may not even track specifically who among their clients, if you will, are homeless. So how do we move forward from here, knowing sort of how we're doing and acknowledging there are quite a few areas that we could work on? One of the things that we wanted to do in the work session that we held in December was just to taking the core 8 duties of the TICH, get a sense of the members' feeling about what were the most valuable roles of the council. And so what you're seeing here are those values ranked based on the conversations that we had and some very quick straw voting that we did during that work session. And so what you'll see is that folks felt like, that flow of information was really critical, developing guidelines around how services are delivered and monitoring or tracking those services, providing resources around homelessness, and providing TA to TDHCA. The others fell a little lower, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. So as we looked at it, we thought, you know, if we're going to focus on particular areas for improvement, what we want to be focusing on are areas where we have some need for improvement, but the members also feel like they're critical, important duties that impact how effective the TICH is. So when we did sort of a weighted average of importance and compliance, the three that came forward are these on your screen presently. One is providing technical assistance to TDHCA. The second was generating guidelines for monitoring and provision of service. And the third was the Information Resource Center. And I have a question mark here because I think as we went through our process of coming to some preliminary recommendations, this one falls out. It is absolutely up to the TICH to decide which things they focus on, but as a prelude to the next slide, we'll say one of the things we want to really make sure is that the TICH is focusing on activities that are non-duplicative. And because of some of the things that are happening at the continuum of care level all across the state, we're not certain whether a lot of emphasis on this is something that would be the best use of the council's time. So then, you know, I think a lot of the conversations that we had with members were about what's important to the TICH, what do we want to work on, what matters, what are we here to do. And so this is not entirely exhaustive, but three of the things that were themes and came out through these conversations again and again were the following. One, we should be working on problems that the state can have an impact on, right? That particularly your position as leaders in your state agencies can influence. So looking at state-focused programs, looking at using state resources, and having sort of a secondary check that we're not duplicating efforts that are being carried out effectively at the local or regional level. The second piece is that we really want to try to sort of have a litmus test or a rule of thumb that the TICH should be engaged in policy recommendation and oversight versus actually implementing programs, which is probably more appropriate at the agency level or via nonprofits that are contracted to do work. And the third thing is we want to be able to measure our progress. This may not be every single time what are the widgets that were produced this year, but we want the TICH to be able to set really defined goals for their work periods and then be able to look back over that period and know whether we achieved the goals. And I think this is really important when we're taking on an issue that is as complex and large as homelessness is. It's very easy to kind of get lost in all of the many things we could be doing. It would be helpful, I think, for the TICH to have a process by which you really narrow what you're working on for whether it's a year or a biennia and move forward in that manner. So if we apply some of these criteria to looking at all of the items that are in statute, we come to some idea for, I didn't actually know that was going to happen. I'm as surprised as you guys. Some potential areas for focus. And so let's look first at membership and operations. These are the ones that I think you guys really already know about. We got to get our legislation straight regarding who the members are of the TICH so that we have the appropriate representation and get those folks appointed. And then we really need to look at clarifying whether each agency is to make a financial contribution, if in fact that is the case, making sure that happens. Then I think we move into the more sort of content-oriented work that will probably be the focus of the action plan that we develop going forward. And the areas that come out as really important are about developing guidelines and providing technical assistance to TDHCA, and then really keeping that policy recommendation focus on the reporting, so actually acting on the authority to make some recommendations to TDHCA and potentially other agency partners, and then working with TDHCA to set even initially some very basic performance measures or indicators for each state agency and beginning to report on those annually. The item around agency contributions, I think, also really relates to this overall duty to ensure that if there are items that the TICH can't carry out itself, that nonprofits are contracted with to carry out the duties. Because obviously if there are no resources that are essentially controlled or directed by the TICH, whether it's whoever it's held by, whether it's the TICH itself or TDHCA, for example, then it's really impossible to delegate those duties effectively. So let's just, in a quick summary, and then we'll open it up for comment and any questions you have about the document itself. We want to correct and fill the council appointments. As we do that, we want to be clear about having folks on the council that actually have the ability to influence policy within their own organizations or their own agencies. We want to make sure that there are resources allocated to the TICH and that we outsource appropriately. And I think this is a longer conversation about really, what are the pieces that the TICH might contemplate outsourcing or delegating to either an agency or a nonprofit entity so that the TICH can really keep that focus on policy, on tracking progress, but also has the information that it needs to move forward. We want to begin to benchmark for progress. So, where are we now? We may be beginning with some very simple tracking items for each agency, given the challenges around data, but I think that working that into an annual process is something that will really lead us to effectiveness on the next bullet point, which is that we've become effective at the reporting that's mandated in the statute. And then finally, we want to maintain and capitalize on the policy orientation. We want to begin to make policy recommendations to the TDHCA, and not only to the TDHCA. One of the things that we didn't go into in depth here in this presentation, but is in the document, is that there's a lot of leeway for interpretation and potentially revision of the legislation in terms of not focusing our policy or recommendations only to TDHCA, but to all of the partner agencies whose services have an impact on the homeless in Texas. So next steps. On March 31st, or by March 31st, we will have an action plan for you folks to review, and it will recommend actions, timelines, and to the degree possible, identify the resources that would be necessary for us to engage in sort of quality improvement around our compliance. At the April TICH meeting, it's expected that the members will select the areas that they really want to work on. TDHCA has asked us to, or us being you, the TICH, to select at least 2 of those areas to focus on throughout the spring and summer, and we would intend to wrap that work up by July 30th with, of course, a plan moving forward for additional items. And Craig has just reminded me that the TICH meeting is April 21st. So I am going to, with Craig over my shoulder here now, unmute folks, and great. And we will be happy to take questions as you have them.
What if I put in the resources?
Harmon told me that it's addressed in his
All right, everybody, you are unmuted. We can hear everybody and everybody can hear each other. So if it's static, you know, turn your mic down.
All right, folks, do you have any questions?
Can you hear me, Diane?
Yes.
This is Mike.
Hi, Mike.
I would just say that I think that the report's very accurate. Nothing really surprised me by it. A couple of things that are brand new. Is that we were setting performance measures for other agencies. Problematic for them to get to agree on those unless one or two things happen, and that is they send somebody to those meetings that is absolutely capable of making a decision for that agency. They agree. So that's a new thought. Probably good, but it is going to take time to mesh that into now. We'll just find somebody who has some time and throw them on this committee, and that's really all we have to do. Well, that's going to be a challenge.
Right. So you're getting quite a bit of background noise, Mike. I'm not sure if it's your microphone or someone else's, but folks, we are muting other folks, so just be aware of your background noise. I think what you were saying, Mike, is that one of the things we're aware of that you've been working on is that particularly as we bring new members on, we're going to really focus on asking these agencies to appoint members that are able to make decisions for their entities. Is that accurate?
That's correct, in light of the fact that we're going to move towards setting performance measures for those agencies.
Right.
We'll need people in the room and on the council that are capable of saying we can do that, or there's no way we're going to do that.
Right, right.
So I think that that's important. And then the second area that I know that from time to time over the years, we have planned to have the council speak to the THCA board. It's never happened. But if we're supposed to provide technical assistance to the THCA board around homelessness, I think we probably ought to plan for that to happen at least once a year, and maybe two if we have any policy issues that we want to make sure that we get before the board.
Right.
So again, nothing. I'm not shocked by any of this. I think it came down right on target. I think y'all did a great job presenting it, and just make sure that we'll have in our hands the results of these things in written form so we can look at them at our April meeting.
Absolutely. So, yeah, folks, because we were having so much background noise, we took executive action and muted you. If you have questions, will you please utilize the chat bar to ask them, or if you'd like to comment, let us know via the chat and we will unmute you. So I will take advantage of the bully pulpit here to say I'd really appreciate you guys taking a look at the written report, particularly around I think the pieces that are a little more subjective about what the important areas are for us to focus on, because that ultimately really has to be the members' decision. But your feedback to us will influence really how we structure that action plan and those recommended steps going forward. So we're unmuting you now. And I think, you know, one of the things I would just like to hear from folks is sort of your general impressions, anything that you think we missed or need to focus on going forward. All right, folks, so this is going to be a speak now or forever hold your peace kind of moment, or at least hold your peace until the April 21st TICH meeting. If you don't have any other comments or questions, we will go ahead and wrap the call up. As I mentioned, Craig will be sending just a slight correction to the written document to you later today or in the morning. We will make sure that with that you have all of my contact information. If you'd like to talk to me directly about this, I will be sort of leading this work but working very closely with THN staff on it between now and the end of March. All right, so we really appreciate you joining us and we look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.